Hang on. I am also, this is my second time doing a Zoom training, so I'm also learning everything. So I have to do a screen share. Okay. And here we go. So can people see the PowerPoint? Can you see me still? Darn, just kidding. So I'm going to mute, actually maybe Gayla, you can mute everyone, and that way no one accidentally is talking and that sort of thing. But if you have anything you want to say, there's a comment function in Zoom, and you can put anything you want to in there if you want to get my attention or anyone else's attention. So again, thank you for joining us. We are in interesting times with virtual accompaniment, and we're all learning as we go. But I'm just going to start off with a spiritual reflection to center us and prepare us for entering the space of accompaniment together virtually. So you are welcome to read this along with me or just listen. I'm going to read it out loud. And this is a prayer called Prophets of a Future Not Our Own. It is rumored, I read online that it's rumored to have been prayed by Oscar Romero, if you know who he is in Central America, but actually it was merely a prayer that was presented at the time that he was alive and popular, when there were a lot of unrest and civil war in the late 70s in Central America. So I find that really meaningful when I listen to this, just to know that it's rooted in a place and unrest that we're still working through today. So this is called Prophets of a Future Not Our Own. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. Fullness in this life is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that fullness in this life always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No leader's visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the congregation's mission. No set of goals and objectives. This is what we're about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something, and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future not our own. Amen. So I find this a very meaningful prayer, just because, especially in the space of accompaniment, it means a lot to know that we're just a piece of the puzzle, and we're kind of here along the journey doing our best. And I want to encourage you all as we enter into this to remind yourself of whatever stood out to you. So let's figure out who's here. So we have 3 staff members participating in this training, and I wanted you all to hear who each of us are and what our roles are, so that, because we have a variety of attendees, some of you who are attending are interested in short-term housing, congregational housing for people who were recently released from detention. And some of you are here for Nueva Esperanza accompaniment teams. And those are usually families who are recently arrived and already in the community. And those are long-term accompaniment for 6 months. So, Gayla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, and I don't know if others are having, you're sometimes sounding a little hard to hear, Kelly. So maybe we could hear you, but it was a little bit faint. So maybe if you can talk closer to the mic. But yes, so good evening, everyone. My name is Gayla King. I'm the Northern California Faith Community Organizer. I think many of you probably have gotten my emails in the past. One of the roles that I'm playing currently in the realm of accompaniment is helping to get congregations prepared to receive people who are getting released from ICE and to provide short-term housing. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about what that looks like.
And I'm Kelly Younger. I mentioned I coordinate the Nueva Esperanza accompaniment team program. So for those of you who are interested in the longer term accompaniment, I would be the person that you're contacting if you have questions and to work through all of the steps. And then Miriam is also on this training. Miriam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you see me? Hi.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Noriega. I'm the program director with the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. My job is to work with all of the wonderful staff like Gayla and Kelly across the state to ensure that our programs are being aligned. For example, some of the material that we're going to be sharing today will be shared with a group of congregations in the Inland Empire. We're also thinking about what their role is in post-release work. So that's really my job, and I'm here to also answer any questions and any support that you guys need. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Gayla, can you hear me better?
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, I'm not going here yet. So there are just a few logistical things about today's training. So as I mentioned, there's a chat box in Zoom. It should be down at the bottom. There should be a control within your screen that says chat. So if you click that, everyone can see that, and we'd appreciate if all of you would put your name, which congregation you're from, and which program you're interested in being a part of, or both, so that we have a record of who's here. And then also throughout the training, if you have questions or ideas you want to bring up, or just anything important you want to communicate, put it in the chat box, because Gayla is going to be reading that as we go. And she may even be answering some of those questions live in the chat. Second of all, you should have received in my message yesterday, along with the Zoom information, I sent you a link to a toolkit, a virtual accompaniment toolkit. So we're going to be referring to that toolkit throughout the training, but you don't need to open yours because I'll be sharing it on the screen. And then lastly, if anyone is not able to attend the full training because it is a little long, we will be recording this and uploading that information along with answers to questions you put in the chat box once this is all done, and we'll send that all out. So let's dig in. Many of you have attended our accompaniment training and some of you have not. So I just wanted to review really quickly some basic principles of accompaniment that are going to remain true even though we're doing virtual accompaniment. So the first and biggest one is self-sufficiency. Our entire goal with accompaniment and virtual accompaniment is that the people that we accompany, we don't do anything for them that they can do for themselves. So often we're functioning as a guide and orienting them to resources in the community so they can establish their life and know where to go for things. And we're just providing them that information. But we try not to do those things for them that they are then able to do once they have that information. We also always want to maintain just a little, voice in our mind, reminding us of the principle of racial equity. So most of our volunteers are from a different background than the people that we're accompanying. And that means different races and different privileges as well. So we always just want to be mindful of where we're coming from in our life, and both our privileges and our challenges influence the way we interact with each other, and try to just be mindful of that in all of our interactions. And another main principle is making sure that we are creating community and spiritual and emotional support through community. So in our accompaniment, we are not there to solve all of someone's problems or make sure their life becomes settled and stable. That may never happen for them, and it may not happen in the short amount of time that we're accompanying them. But what we can provide them is community. That's why it's called accompaniment and not helping, because at the end of the day, what we can do is provide them company as they work their way through their life. One of the questions someone asked ahead of time when I put out the RSVP was if congregations can join together, and the answer is yes. So if any of you are wanting to do a form of accompaniment but feel like you need an additional congregation to make it possible, that's totally fine. If you have a congregation in mind, go for it. Create that agreement and arrangement between yourselves. But if you don't have one in mind, you're welcome to reach out to myself or Gayla, and we can connect you to a congregation that might be interested in the same things you are. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing as the impact of COVID-19 on the families that we're accompanying. Some of it I'm sure you're seeing in your own friends and family, such as employment. People's jobs are impacted. In the case of families we're accompanying, they pretty much have all lost their jobs completely. Some have just had hours reduced. So for example, one family went from 3 incomes to half of 1 income. So it's just important. I mean, you guys will all see this, that it's a huge shock, and it's very scary to know where income will be coming from. Just a second. Sorry, I lost my place. So most of the families that we work with work in restaurant work, painting, cleaning, gardening, and construction. So these are often jobs that don't have a safety net. When they're done, they're done. And there's no guarantee that they'll have the work once COVID-19 passes. So there are just some things to keep in mind. And of course, for people coming directly out of detention, they don't have a job. And so that's definitely going to be often the first thing on people's minds is, I need to get a job. Another thing that we're seeing are barriers to resources. So typically in accompaniment, we would look at the interfaith resource guide. We would guide people to resources in the community. Many of those resources are now shut down completely or have totally different services than what they originally had. For example, their schools have become food banks. In many communities, they're continuing to serve meals several times a day, but they're also providing groceries. So there are also new resources that didn't exist because the community is coming together to try to provide. There are very unique challenges with our population that makes it also really hard to access the resources that are out there. So some examples are that a lot of resources that are through more formal channels, like a large nonprofit or even a government resource, a social service, they have a lot of red tape. There's more bureaucracy with those. So for example, you often need to fill out an extensive application. One family in Redwood City went to the local community center to get a rental assistance application, and one of the things they need to submit is proof of loss of income. Well, they don't have proof of loss of income due to the nature of the work they were doing before. It was an informal job, so there's no way they can provide that unless they and teams get creative. And for example, you could possibly ask the employer, the previous employer, for a letter stating that they lost their income. But a lot of families don't want to ask that because culturally they would see their boss as an authority and they wouldn't want to go there. But then also people don't want documented where they were working because some people have work permits and some people do not. And so just the whole notion of getting documentation of proof of loss of income is a barrier. And as a result, this family never submitted their application. So I just wanted to give that example of an unexpected barrier to resources that are out there. Another example would be that many food banks they have food available, but you have to pick up the food in your car because they're trying to maintain social distancing. Well, not everyone has a car. So how do you get the food? So there are just a variety of barriers going on. And then there's the more common, like there's the barriers that we all probably think of, which are some resources are not available if you don't have a certain immigration status, like unemployment benefits, or other resources just have run out of funds. There's so many people applying for help that they have to close and maybe reopen at a later date. So Gayla, do you want to speak a little bit to the context of dangerous conditions inside ICE?
Sure. So as Kelly has been sharing the barriers and the impact on people that are kind of outside, are already in our community, that many of you have been working with through the Nueva Esperanza accompaniment, we are also in touch with people that are still inside ICE detention. And maybe some of you are familiar with our Friends Afuera letter writing program, some of our freedom campaigns. And so we have all been concerned with the ongoing, the worsening of the situation of COVID overall, but in particular inside ICE detention, inside prisons, and inside jails. So this has been a lot of our advocacy, as well as our accompaniment of trying to be in touch with people on the inside and getting information. This has also led us to, like you're seeing that's listed below, or some of these creative solutions. And I just wanted to lift up one of the stories. So you see on these photos, the heart shape of people that are inside. This is actually inside Mesa Verde ICE detention. These were men who were getting fed up after trying to raise concerns for their own safety within Mesa Verde, and they weren't being heard. So they formed this heart formation prior to joining a hunger strike. And so we've been in touch with one of the organizers during that time, and you'll see on the right side, that photo is one of those organizers, Charles Joseph, who, because of a lawsuit and federal court order, was released. So in addition to the advocacy, another way that we're inviting congregations that we're talking about today is to provide short-term housing for folks as they're getting released from ICE. Do you want to share more, Kelly, about some of these other creative solutions?
Yeah, so some of the solutions that I'm seeing are families are separating in order to find work. So some, for example, some people with a husband within a family has left the Bay Area and driven to Kentucky because he knew someone there who had a job for him. And then his brother is going to join him. So, you know, it's sort of out of desperation, but it's also very creative to go and get some work. And then another solution I saw was many of the families we accompany have roommates because it makes housing more affordable. So in one house, all the roommates banded together and they decided right in the beginning, they said, we're going to take care of each other. We're each going to contribute $40 a week into a pool. And if any of us ends up losing our jobs and running out of money, then we'll cover each other's expenses out of that pool. So it's been a really, I mean, in the end, 4 out of 5 people in that house lost their jobs. So but they committed to accompany each other in that way. And I just think it's really amazing that they're doing it that way. Another example are shared resources. So often if one person in the community gets a bag of food from the food bank, they'll share it with others and that sort of thing. And also word of mouth spreads really quickly. So if someone hears that you were able to get such and such a resource here, suddenly they tell their 10 best friends and word spreads like wildfire in that way. So I wanted to highlight those because often it's our responsibility with a solution, but that's where we remind ourselves again, we're here to accompany. We do orient people and support them in the ways that we can, but people are not helpless. They're very creative and very resourceful and often come up with solutions themselves that we never even would have thought of.
Great. So to share a little bit more about what the short-term congregational housing accompaniment is looking like. So with the urgency of what's happening in ICE detention, one of the main strategies to get people released is for, maybe you've been following this, lawsuits aimed at ICE, naming people who are most vulnerable to COVID-19. And the result has been that federal judges have actually been ordering some people to be released. So Charles, you saw in the earlier photo, was one of the people. It's still not that many people given the scale and the urgency, but some people are being released and more lawsuits are being filed. So we anticipate that more people will be. One of the things that ICE wants to see in order to release someone is some kind of fixed address. They're treating this as a temporary release, and their hope is they can just quickly rearrest people after COVID-19. Legal teams will be fighting that. But in the meantime, ICE wants to see a fixed address. They want the person to mostly be on house arrest and to be wearing an ankle monitor. Many people have families to go to who don't want to give their address to ICE. And so that's the ask of congregations, is to provide that address. Others don't have places to go to. But with support of the legal team and interfaith movement and others, of helping to find more longer-term housing. So the ask right now is for congregations, which we know many are abandoned during shelter in place, to open up their space to house people. So currently this is happening kind of all over the state. Up here in Northern California, we're working with 3 congregations that are getting ready to receive someone or get approval to receive someone. And this is working closely with Pangea. So just an example of someone that we're working with, it's a young man who fled El Salvador, fleeing violence, gang violence. So he came here seeking asylum. And in his early 20s, through something that happened in his hometown in Monterey County, ICE detained him, and he has been detained for 4 years. He's 26 years old. So over this 4 years, he's had the support of a legal team that's been trying to get him out. So he was a part of a recent lawsuit, and a federal judge ordered his release. So he's coming out hopefully today, and one congregation is able to take him for the weekend, and we're hoping another congregation will be able to take him for about another month while he continues to be here, get some medical support before transitioning back to his hometown. So that's just one example. We would absolutely welcome other congregations who may have space and are open to this idea to get in touch with me. My email will be at the end. And you can go to the next slide, Kelly. We've created kind of a FAQs, and I think Kelly sent that out in the email, of just trying to gather information that we've been hearing from congregations. And actually this congregational working group has been helping to create some FAQs for folks, like just trying to answer some immediate questions. So I would recommend you check that out if you think this is something your congregation would be open to, and then getting in touch with me as soon as you can. We hope and we anticipate that more releases will happen as these lawsuits are being filed and as federal judges have been ordering ICE to release people. So I think that's all I'll share about that for now, but please do get in touch with me if you're interested.
Thanks, Kayla. So some of the questions that were asked in the RSVP was just, how does this all work? What do you mean by virtual? How do we communicate? So first off, most communication with families and individuals is going to be through the phone. So people need a phone. If a family that you're matched with for any reason does not have a phone, or an individual being released does not have a phone, we will work out with the congregation how we can provide a phone, either through us, through them, or through some sort of partnership with that. It's important to listen to what works best for the family. there are different levels of technology knowledge for all of our volunteers and for each family and individual. So we have some people that are really savvy with WhatsApp. Most of the families and individuals we accompany use WhatsApp to communicate with their family at home because it's free if you have Wi-Fi. And so they'll know that very well and be able to talk by video on there even. You can also do group chats on WhatsApp. A lot of people are also on Facebook, and Facebook has platforms to be able to talk in a group and individually. And then otherwise there's good old fashioned just phone calls. We can call each other, and we can do so if there's a language barrier, we can do so through an interpreter. So every team will have at least one person who it can communicate in the language of the person that we accompany. And I just encourage you all to use that resource. A lot of people depend on text and Google Translate to communicate, which works really well for simple things. But when they're more in-depth questions, especially those kind of soulful questions and check-ins, it builds relationship and provides community in a deeper way when you can verbally talk to people or even video through the interpreter. So I would just encourage you all to remember that you have that resource. So the next part of what we're going to be talking about is kind of a 3-step model of accompaniment, but also virtual accompaniment. The first step is that we want to turn to community resources as much as we can. So for this, we have the tool that we'll be reviewing together called the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity Resource Guide. Once we've exhausted options with the resource guide, we want to turn to congregational resources, which typically means fundraising or just networking. A lot of what families need right now is just straight up money. And that's tricky because we don't want to be in a position where we're seen as a rescuer, a financial rescue. However, at the same time, we are in a pandemic and it calls to think outside of the box. So we're going to be talking more later about fundraising and using our networks to support families. And then a third part of approaching accompaniment are using our Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity resources, which means myself and Gayla to consult with, but also we have an emergency fund. And this fund has $500 available per family, and we will talk more about each of these resources and approaches in just a minute. So we're going to start off with the resource guide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of this presentation and I'm going to open on my internet the resource guide so you all can see the way that I'm navigating through the toolkit that it's a part of. So here we go. So can you all see my toolkit? Are you guys looking at my toolkit right now?
Yeah.
No. I am.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So just a minute.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it to be a larger screen. I'm going to stop sharing it and then I'm going to reshare it. Just a second.
Kelly, and the resource guide should I tried to send the link, it should be, anyone should be able to view it. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. So I sent this yesterday by email, but we'll send all of this again as a nice little package when this is over, along with the recording. But the link I sent you was to the toolkit. It is called the Team Lead Toolkit because I'm treating virtual accompaniment as a temporary approach, and therefore the tools that are useful to teams when we are not in shelter in place, I still want you all to have access to, because potentially you will start virtual accompaniment and transition into in-person accompaniment, in which case these tools will also be helpful. So when you open up the Team Lead Toolkit, here you see some really basic information. It's instructions of how to use the toolkit, the model of how we do accompaniment, which includes how often we meet as a team, and then guidelines for using an interpreter, but also for the interpreter themselves. So we're going to be focusing on this folder, which is called resources. If we click on resources, again, we have two pieces of really basic information. We have a guideline for the Migrant Emergency Fund, which we'll be going over later, and we have the resource guide. So that's what we are going to go over now. So this is our beautiful resource guide. We've done our best over the years to compile all the resources that have been helpful, particularly to the population that we work with. So the first step when you are using this is to make sure that the index is on. So when you open it sometimes, this might look blank, and you want to click this because it's a really helpful way to fast track to certain resources in the community. This document is about 70 pages long, so you don't want to have to scroll through all of that. You want to be able to jump around to where you want to go. So today we are going to be talking about the COVID-19 section, which is right here, and you can also see and access it through this first page where it's highlighted to the COVID-19 resources. If we are not in regular accompaniment, if we are not in virtual accompaniment, it's more relevant to go follow steps 2 and 3 and 4, where it's basic information about resources in the community, but we have no guarantee that those resources are available right now because of COVID-19. So we tried to pull together what we know is available here in the COVID-19 section. So if I click on it, this blue bookmark word appears, and when I click the word bookmark, it takes me directly to this section. The same thing happens if I click that section in the index over here. So this is a lot of information. It is very difficult to organize it. So I want to recognize it can be confusing and overwhelming to scroll through these things, which is why we have highlighted what we think is particularly helpful in green. So today I'm just going to show you how this is organized and talk about a few of the resources in particular that are highlighted in green. First, we have general information about COVID-19, and then we have a section about financial assistance. The financial assistance section has mostly, this first one is a relief fund that you can apply for, but many of these relief funds might be closed because they've run out of funds at this point or they're waitlisted. This one I highlighted because as far as I know, it's not waitlisted yet. And others are just a list of lists. So it's like a list, another list of resources that we find particularly helpful. This, in San Francisco, they have an UndocuFund for undocumented folks. This one is currently waitlisted, but I tried to put an update in there because that can change. So I put the date and the status. But when that opens up, it'll be really helpful. And then these next four, I think, are particularly helpful. I've found them to have less barriers than the more official nonprofit and social services avenue, because these are all mutual aids and grassroots efforts to help provide for people. So this first one is a map of all the different mutual aid groups in the Bay Area. I'll just give you a sneak peek. So you get this map, and these are all the different groups that have banded together. So you can zoom in and click each one of these, and then you're gonna see what their requirements are, who they provide aid to. Mutual aid basically means it's volunteers in the community who have resources of some sort and are offering to share those resources. So I wanted you all to know about those, because one way to utilize mutual aid funds and assistance is that if your team is feeling maxed out for whatever reason or just wants to get additional assistance, this is a great way to do it, because there are lots of people eager and willing to help. So you could sign up for someone to deliver groceries to a family or pick up a prescription. Or there can even be requests for usually smaller financial relief. So for example, if someone needs diapers paid for and dropped off at their home, or if they need a contribution to their rent. So these four are all mutual aid funds, or they're churches that have their own network set up similar to a mutual aid fund. I wanted to point out on the app next door, if any of you are on it, on the left-hand section, they have something called a help map. And basically, just like the map we just looked at, their little dots show up in your neighborhood wherever someone has offered that they want to help. And you can click on a dot and can send them a message directly and say, hey, I'm accompanying this family, they need blank. Are you able to assist? And here's how you can. So it's a way to be direct with people who want to help without all the bureaucracy that is creating barriers for our families. Obviously, we have our whole congregation that we're hopefully engaging in a similar way of how they might also be of assistance. But these are another backup and another option. So, and this is another one, mutual aid with the Quakers. So I'm still scrolling through. The reason these are not highlighted is because I'm not totally sure if they're open and available right now. Something that would be really helpful is if you all are going through these resources and find that something is closed or not available anymore, or you find certain hours and helpful information, please edit this resource list. Add into the additional notes section of each entry any information that would be helpful for other teams. That way we are helping each other as well. You can edit it directly, or if you click this speech bubble up here, it'll let you make a comment. I cannot make a comment because I own this document, but you all can make a comment that looks just like this. You write your comment in, and then other people can reply to what you've written. So that's by clicking this speech bubble right here. So I'm going through. The next section, so we just went through this financial assistance section. Now we have a section called local resources. So these are specific to regions of the Bay Area. I think this resource is particularly helpful. It is a map of where they have free student meals. It's similar to what we just looked at. I'm a very visual person. That's why I think all these maps are helpful. So you can kind of look at where your family is staying and click on a certain school, and it'll tell you the hours of how to access food at that school and any other requirements. For example, this particular school, you need to bring your own grocery bag from home. Sorry, trying to get out of here. And then the next section is county specific. So now we're zooming in even more. So we have all the different counties. And I'm just scrolling through because I'm particularly highlighting the green ones. Samaritan House in San Mateo and Santa Clara County, we know has funds available, but their website is super confusing. So I would suggest that you just send an email to this address in order to find out how to access the funds they have. And we're going to keep going. We get to the statewide resources, and I think this list is particularly helpful from Immigrants Rising. It's not the best formatted list because it's a Word document, but they do constantly update it. So they updated their list yesterday, for example. This is a preview of what it looks like. And we tried to put in here whether resources are available in Spanish, which is nice because if your family, some families don't have the internet or literacy skills to be able to access this information themselves. But if your family or individual does, you can send them these lists in Spanish and they could potentially access these resources themselves. And then this is another one that has a Spanish version. So I would encourage you all, you may notice that some of these resources you need to speak English to access, to call the phone number or to fill out the application online. That, because we have team interpreters, that shouldn't be a barrier. Just remember to include your interpreter and you can just function as a conduit. So if you have an application that can be is only able to be filled out online, but the family is perfectly capable of filling it out if it were to be in Spanish, the interpreter can translate with them through the phone while you type in answers. And it's just, again, a creative way to ensure that we are accessing resources with families, but also it encourages the self-sufficiency. We're not filling it out for them. We're just helping them fill it out and they're providing the answers. So back to.
There's a few questions that are coming up. Kelly,
Oh,
can
sure.
I ask them from
Yeah.
you? Okay. One of them was, well, first, just big props on the list of resources are amazing. But a question about how you get on the Nextdoor help map. I don't know if you've done that. That's one question. The other question is, do you have interpreters that could support in Marin?
So I will show you a graphic of the help map in just a minute. In Marin, I don't personally have the name of someone off the top of my head, but we do have networks in Marin that I can ask if they know of someone interested in volunteering as an interpreter. So I would imagine we would be able to find someone. And additionally, one of the benefits of virtual accompaniment is you don't all have to live near each other. So right now, for example, we have a family that lives in Mountain View, a family and their team, but their interpreter lives in Concord because their interpreter is just over the phone, so it works. And if we were to transition to in-person accompaniment, then we would problem solve them and try to get an interpreter closer to the location. But we shouldn't have a problem getting an interpreter, especially because we can do it virtually at this point. So I'm gonna pull up Nextdoor and show you guys through my video what I'm talking about. And hopefully this works okay. So here's my tiny Nextdoor app icon. So I'm gonna go in, there's Nextdoor. Here's my normal Nextdoor page, and I'm gonna show you where the help map is. Just a second. Okay, so when you open the app, you have all of these messages. It's almost like Facebook. You have all these messages from people from your community, your neighbors. But then if you look down at the bottom, there's a menu. So if you click on the menu, this is what pops up. It's a list of stuff within the app. And if I scroll to the very top of the menu, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. If I scroll to the very top of the menu, there's a help map. So let's see what pops up. Ding. All those little green dots are neighbors of mine that want to help. And if I click on a dot, hold on. It's hard to do this from behind. If I click on a dot, I'll read you what popped up. It's the person's name, and then they said, here to help with running errands, picking up meds, groceries, or other essentials. So he already wrote what he wants to help with, and then I can just message him, and there's like a safety message. And it's just a direct message, and I can write him whatever I want. Hey, I live 2 blocks from you. Would you be able to help in this way? So hopefully that helped. But it is in the, again, it is in the more menu, and then it's all the way at the top, and it says help map. So there you go. So as far as using the resource guide, I would suggest the following steps. One is, first you have to identify the needs of the individual or family that you're accompanying. And the best way to do that is talk to them a lot. So as I mentioned before, I highly suggest talking to them through the interpreter, but you can also text for simpler questions. I'm going to show you a resource back in the, sorry, I'm just getting there. Back in the Team Lead Toolkit. Can you guys see my toolkit? So I'm back in the team lead toolkit. The rest of what we'll be looking at is probably in this COVID-19 folder. I go to COVID-19. Here I have a family check-in guide. It is not necessary that you do everything in this guide, but it is a suggestion of the different types of things you can check into the family about. So you don't need to read this, but I wanted just to point out that I've put different topics of what you can check in about. How are they feeling? What are some of their fears? This is that emotional, spiritual support you can provide. Employment, etc. Education and childcare. So there are some things that we might not have thought about, and so it would be good to skim this list and just get some ideas of what to remember to check in with them about. Sorry, I'm getting back to the... So the first step is identifying what the needs are for the individual or the families, and then we have the resource guide. So as I mentioned, the resource guide is very extensive and can be overwhelming. And so I've seen teams decide to divide and conquer. So like one person on the team will do one section of the resource list or one page of the resource list and look at the different resources to see if they're applicable to the needs of the family. I say this because we have been asked if these different resources are vetted and guaranteed to be helpful. And I just can't, I cannot speak for all of the families because every family is in a different situation. So for example, we have some families that are considered disabled. So there are resources in the resource guide that are for disabled folks. So that's not helpful to other families that aren't considered disabled. So really someone needs to go through and see what is applicable to your family. And then third approach is reducing the barriers to the resource in order to enable self-sufficiency. So what do I mean by this? I have a couple of examples. Just a second. So an example might be that someone they don't have enough money for rent this month and they tried to go to the rental assistance agency, but they can't provide the documentations needed. Well, that might be the end of the road for them from their perspective, but you're coming, generally, we are coming from a culture where people advocate for themselves in a different way. And so you can use that skill of yours to help them advocate creatively, and you can help them prepare themselves to advocate with their landlord, either by defending themselves with documentation that you get from certain websites about how to pursue the rent moratorium that's across the state right now, or you could ask more personally if their landlord would consider rent forgiveness. So just keeping that open mind, that reduces the barrier that there appeared to be a barrier, but there are ways that we can creatively get around that. Another barrier that we've encountered is that a lot of financial resources, the way that you receive the financial resource is that you're supposed to receive the funds either through PayPal or Venmo, or you're supposed to receive them, provide your bank account information to get the financial assistance. I haven't seen any of our families have PayPal or Venmo, and very few of them have a bank account. So again, that's where you can get creative. Perhaps someone on your team or in your congregation could offer their PayPal, Venmo, or bank account information to receive the funds and then distribute it in cash to the family, obviously informing the family where it came from. So yeah, those are some examples. Oops. So talking through the next step, if you remember, first was sort of the community resources, and then we want to talk about congregational resources. So in non-virtual accompaniment, in without shelter in place, our principle in maintaining self-sufficiency is that typically if a family or individual is in a situation, a tight financial situation, the congregation would determine if they can fundraise for the family and to what extent. And then they would also include the family in the fundraising. So for a really common way people do that is that a family will make tamales, and then they'll bring them to the service on a Saturday or a Sunday and sell the tamales. So that way the family and the congregation are working together for the fundraising. But that type of thing isn't really possible right now. So it's something to think through, is to what extent can your congregation fundraise, but also is there a way to include the family? And the way that I'm seeing right now is that families are asked to write up or verbalize, and then someone on the team writes up what they want to share about themselves and their story. So if you all saw the most recent Nueva Esperanza newsletter, we included Enard's thank you note that he wrote to everyone who has fundraised for him. And he has graphic design skills, so he even included a photo of himself and his family, and he chose the font and arranged it, and it was really sweet. So there are ways to include them even though it's virtual. And we've had other people just provide a photo of themselves. It's simple and it's doable, and it gives them a sense of agency and participation. Some congregations are not able to fundraise for various reasons, and we just wanted to recognize that. Congregations have needs within their own community that limits how much they can fundraise for others. However, I would encourage you all to just think through and talk if you do encounter a barrier to fundraising, talk through with people some of those barriers and some of the reasons to advocate to still be able to do it. So for example, congregational funds are way more accessible than community funds. One of the resources that I had highlighted 3 weeks ago in the resource list, I had to unhighlight today because they've exhausted their $11 million fund for rental assistance. So there's just a lot of resources that aren't available, but congregations, all the grassroots avenues are much more accessible. And then of course, in our faith values, a lot of us say that we are supporting the most vulnerable, but out of all the times to support people, now in the middle of a pandemic would be one of the times. So it's just something to remember if you're encountering that barrier. And then lastly, there is a huge benefit to your own small team's accompaniment. So the biggest way to include them is often fundraising, sharing part of the family's story, and doing so with regular updates so that it's not out of the blue when you ask for fundraising, and so that people are growing in their own understanding of the immigrant experience. I've seen that congregations that are not preparing for fundraising, that have siloed themselves as a team working with a family, and that's kind of, it's between the two of them, they have a really hard time fundraising because it seems so out of the blue when they come up with an ask. So it's just important to include your congregation in your accompaniment experience as much as possible. And that can be through a newsletter or just verbal conversations with people that you're close to in the community. So here in the blue square, we've highlighted transparency and boundaries are key. Why did I say that? Because for self-sufficiency purposes, we want to communicate that fundraising is not our purpose in accompanying them. Fundraising is something that we are doing for emergency situations and because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So it's important to communicate that this is perhaps a one-time fundraising or short-term fundraising to provide financially given the crisis that families are in. Okay, so last but not least, we're almost through all of this. I'm sorry I'm talking so much. And we will have a time for questions also at the end. Is the IM4HI Migrant Emergency Fund. So the Migrant Emergency Fund is obviously for emergencies, and it is intended to be up to $500 per family as a one-time accessibility, one-time amount. That being said, if a family only needs $200, then at a later date, there's $300 left that they could access. Things do not always work in order, so I also want to recognize that if your family needs financial assistance and you want to fundraise for them, fundraising does take time, and we can step in and provide for the immediate emergency need while you all gather funds together. So I wanted to put that out there because it kind of takes the pressure off of an emergency situation. And also you don't have to fundraise for us to give the emergency fund, but obviously we appreciate if you fundraise as well, because you can either replenish part of the emergency fund that we use for them, or you can gift them an additional amount. So I'm going to show you in the toolkit where to access more information about the emergency fund. So I'm back in the toolkit. If you remember, I'm going to go back just from the beginning so it's clearer for you all. This is what the toolkit looks like when you open it up. I'm going into the resources section. I'm going into, actually I don't need to do that. Here is the Migrant Emergency Fund guidelines. So there are a lot of details here. What I want to highlight are these parts at the bottom. So funneling money. So some congregations are not able, they think they are not able to fundraise because they are not able to gift money directly to an individual or a family. So if that's the case, we can, if you all fundraise and then send the money to our emergency fund, and put a note in your donation that you want it to go to a certain family, then we will funnel it for you and gift it directly to that family. So I want you all to know that, because it's also beneficial if people want to have the tax benefit of making a donation to a nonprofit. They can do it through us, and then they can individually say which family they want to give it to. And as far as the process goes, we typically send a check and they go out on Tuesdays. So they can take up to 2 weeks to arrive, which is important to be aware of. But also, if we're sending a check, that means it's really helpful to know the name of who the check is going to and the address so we can process it quickly. We try to send the checks as much as possible directly for some sort of service. So for rent, it would go to the landlord. For a dental emergency, it would go to the dentist. There are times when that is not what's needed, and the emergency that's needed is basically cash. And in that case, we will send the check directly to the family, or we will send it to someone in your congregation or on your team for them to receive the check, cash it, and give the cash to the family. And the benefit of that is that because families don't have bank accounts, if they are receiving a check, they have to go to check cashing places and pay a fee. And that's one way to avoid the fee. So I just wanted you all to be aware of those little nuances that help the process be beneficial to everybody. And then likewise, we also have a PayPal account. And so if we are sending the money if the money is going to be cash and it's going to the family directly, we can PayPal it to a team member or congregation member who can give them the cash, so they get it more immediately, since our process takes 1 to 2 weeks to get the check to someone. And then lastly, if the family needs more than $500, I don't want you to think of that as the end of the road. We are in a crisis. We're being flexible. And so we just would need to understand the situation and consider if we're able to meet their need. So please do ask, even if it's more than $500. So that's pretty much it. A lot of information, a lot of details. I really appreciate all of you listening, and I hope that this has been helpful, hearing some of the tools and some of the practical pieces of virtual accompaniment. If you have any next steps, I'd appreciate if you just keep in mind, here's my email address and Gayla's as well. And we do have a Q&A time now. So Gayla, is there anything else you wanted to say before we open it up for questions?
No, not at all. I mean, people have been posing questions and comments in the chat, which has been great, but definitely please type in any questions that you might have in these last few minutes.
And I'm just going to ask again, if everyone could please, if you haven't already, if you could please put your name and congregation name and which type of accompaniment you're interested in into the chat. That would be really helpful, which would be longer term Nueva Esperanza accompaniment with me, or the shorter term congregational housing with Gayla. So I guess one last comment is that what next steps that we're thinking is that based on who attended today and what interests you all have, we're hoping that over the next 2 weeks, we reach out to different congregations and try to match them to move forward. So you could expect to hear from one of us pretty quickly.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat. I think that's because Kelly did such a thorough job walking through everything. So I guess it sounds like you'll follow up and share these links again, Kelly, with everyone. And like Kelly said, if anyone's interested to learn more about short-term congregational housing, please contact me, and Kelly can take all questions about Nueva Esperanza.
Any questions right now? I guess we could, are people muted? You would have to unmute yourself to be able to ask a question, but maybe there's no questions.
No, I've got a question. I've got a
Well, unfortunately, I can't.
Someone, yeah, it's hard to hear. I think their sound is a little bit, try again.
Okay, I've got a question, and that is for congregations that do not have shower facilities, are any of them offering shelter during the COVID crisis for ICE detainees?
Yes, there is actually a
Repeat the
congregation
question.
right now. There's a congregation right now that is offering housing for 2 to 3 days, and they don't have a shower.
Okay.
They're just kind of making a space for someone.
Okay.
So that is possible.
And I'm also the one that asked about the length of time you're looking for, and you said anywhere from a couple of days to the time for sheltering in place, which at this point in Marin County is through May.
Right.
So is that the length of time?
Each case is different. Some have been just a few days to get them settled before they move on to their next location. Others are trying to settle in the Bay Area, so may want a few more weeks, and then support for finding longer term housing would be a part of that. So I would say just looking at the FAQs, it kind of lays things out more, and then I'm happy to follow up if you have more questions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle.
And I would add that, I don't know if we're thinking of the same congregation, Gayla, but one congregation that doesn't have shower facilities is exploring the option of a hookup that you attach to your sink, because the bathroom that they have available has a drain in it. So then you're able to shower yourself through with the sink faucet. And then they're also exploring what's kind of like a camping shower. So it's an outdoor shower that you can set up, and it's a temporary shower. So I'm just putting that out there.
Thank you.
Right. There's one question, Kelly, for you about how many people should be on an accompaniment team for a congregational team. How many do you suggest?
So we suggest 5. That usually consists of a team lead, someone who can function as an interpreter, and 3 more individuals. That number is not set in stone, but it's what we've seen as the most successful. So usually when it's less people, people can get overwhelmed. And when it's more people, it can get a little confusing and jumbled because there's too many cooks in the kitchen. So different congregations have different setups as well. Sometimes there's a team and that's it. And sometimes the team is housed within some sort of committee. So for example, one congregation has a social action committee of 25 people. These are all people that want to be involved in an accompaniment, but 5 of those people are the team. And then when they need additional help, they reach out to the committee members. So you have freedom to organize how it works best for your congregation, but we do recommend 5.
Could I make a, I don't know if I'm on audio or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. A suggestion is we're working with the Sheriff Israel in our congregation.
Right.
We have 5 on our team, and we got someone on asylum on that. Sheriff Israel has at least 5 or so. And what we have done, because with this family, we've worked on the financial, the medical, the housing. So what we needed more than 5 because and plus a lot of supplies that they need for their living situation. So we divided our group and assigned, we've used your system very effectively. Thank you so much for that. So we divided our team up according to what each person's expertise was.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to add to that, which is that one thing we're not talking about in this training are more of the details of what we call the NEAT model, which are the logistical pieces. So how do you divide up a team? How often does the team meet as a group? How often do I meet with you as the coordinator? So those are pieces that I'm happy to talk through with you all. But just so you know, the next step is matching teams. And then once teams agree that they want to move forward, I conduct and facilitate the first team meeting. So I just want you all to know that that is a piece of the support. Anybody else?
It's a lot to process.
Well, do you want to say anything, because you're with Sheriff Israel, and they're actually our first, like they are actually in the middle of virtual accompaniment as of about 2 weeks ago they started. So
Right.
maybe you can just share a little bit about your experience.
Me, Greer?
Yeah.
I'm actually with St. Mary's.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. We have joined because of many reasons. We decided we could work more effectively by working with another congregation that was after the same goal. And as I say, we've used your system a lot. David Crossan with St. Mary's took this same training course, I guess it was last week or 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And we have used this model a lot. And in the first, and we meet every week on Fridays to both assess where we are, what has been accomplished from what our goals were from the week before, and try not to have anyone be overwhelmed. And there is a lot to do on our committees because of the family's need. We first established through interpreters, we have, interesting enough, the person we got out for asylum out of the Adelanto Detention Center is now part of our team.
So they're essentially doing post-release.
So, and he is obviously one of our interpreters, therefore. And we have actually two. We have doctors on our teams because one of the issues was medical, both for the husband and the wife of this family. And then there are financial issues, and exactly what you suggested about the financial, you have to take your lead from the family. The goal is to have them be self-sufficient. We are not a bank, and we don't want them thinking of us as a bank, because that would serve nobody very well. And not only that, we're not in that business of being a bank. However, for the first go around, they had to come up with rent very fast. So we worked with Sheriff Israel, with you all, and with the St. Mary's, and managed to come up and spoke with the landlord, had to establish that he was willing to accept the rent and the initial down payment from different sources, or how did he wish to have it? So that all had to be established. Mm-hmm. And then I've been just on the, I'm not sure what we called it, what we called housing, but not in the sense that we are looking for housing. Also, we've sent them to resources, and we're using resource to find them a much less expensive place for more space, because they're not in a good situation. But they had nothing except a baby of 9 months, and they had absolutely nothing but a bed. They had no kitchen, no bathroom of their own. And so it was a matter of saying, well, what do you need? What do you want in your room? and we just sourced it however we could source it. Actually, just yesterday, a neighbor here where I am, I don't live that far from where they're staying. I'm on Potrero Hill in San Francisco. A neighbor came up with a vacuum. First question was, does it work? Then, of course, I did order filters to make sure they would have those to start out, and delivered that yesterday. And a couple of days before, I had some extra things they let us know they needed. They didn't have a broom or a dust, simple things that we take for granted.
Kurt,
So it's a matter of breaking up in teams that way. So, and that works.
yeah, I think curtains are still on their list, right?
It is still on their list, and we haven't come up with that. You're right. Yeah, yeah. But they're super nice people, and we're glad to be able to accompany them on this.
And hopefully that can be encouraging to you all to hear, because I know some of the concerns is, well, there are times that you may interact non-virtually, like dropping off a piece of furniture, but each congregation can determine to what extent they're comfortable with that type of thing. And it's okay to say no if you can't do something. And it's okay to say yes if you're comfortable with it. So I think that you all will have a really rich experience accompanying, even if it's virtually, and hopefully you'll be able to have a relationship with people even when shelter in place is over. So thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll hear from you all soon. We'll send out a follow-up email, and I look forward to hearing more.
Kelly, quick question. This
Yeah.
entire time it says Deborah Lee by your.
I know. I wish I was Reverend Deborah Lee, but I can't fill her shoes. I can only use her Zoom account.
I see. Okay.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to send out the meeting number and the password instead of a link? Because some of us have the Zoom client instead of using a web link, and it would be easier for us to just put in the meeting number and the password. But I couldn't do that with my Zoom client because that wasn't spelled out in the link.
Okay. That's great. That's really good feedback. Yes, we can definitely do that. Sometimes it's easier because the password is embedded, but we can send out the link with the meeting ID and password separated. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That was on the email. That's how I
Some
logged in.
people got different emails.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
yeah. But that's really good feedback. I haven't heard that, so we can do that both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.